everybody, and welcome back to the Jane Austen Summer Program Sense and Sensibility vlog series. As always, I'm your co-host, Sarah.
I'm your co-host, Nadea.
And I'm your co-host, Maisie.
And we are here to talk about Jane Austen's first published novel, Sense and Sensibility, which came out in 1811. It is also going to be the primary novel we're looking at the Jane Austen Summer Program 2025, which will be taking place in New Bern, North Carolina this year, June 19th through the 22nd. So we cannot wait to see you all there. Today, we are going to be talking about the theme of sisterhood as it plays out in the novel. Obviously, sisterhood is a huge deal in Sense and Sensibility. Our two main characters are Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood, who are sisters who make up the titular Sense and Sensibility. So we've got a lot of great stuff to talk about. First, I should probably tell you why I'm wearing sunglasses, because you're probably wondering, why does she look so cool and mysterious? It's not because I'm trying to look cool and mysterious, although I do aspire always to look cool and mysterious. It's actually because I am on vacation at the beach, and this morning I got a lot of sunscreen in my eyes, and they're watery and red, and they look terrible, and I can't see anything. So please indulge in my sunglasses, and don't make fun of me in the comments. Without further ado, I think Maisie is going to kick us off talking about some sisterhood and where we see it in volume 1 of the novel.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. So looking through the first volume of Sense Sensibility, there are a lot of moments where we see Eleanor and we see Marianne, and they have to interact and work through problems, but a lot of the really close sisterly action happens later in the novel. But I think a really great example of sisterhood, kind of personified, happens in chapter 4. That chapter begins with Eleanor and Marianne discussing Edward, and Marianne, as one would believe her to do, is kind of bemoaning the fact that Edward doesn't really have taste, and he's a bit boring and flat, and Eleanor is kind of pushing back on that a little bit, saying like, well, he doesn't draw himself maybe, but he appreciates art, surely. And there's a sentence, third paragraph down, where it reads, Marianne was afraid of offending and said no more on the subject. And so I liked that, kind of caught my eye first, because even though Marianne has wildly different opinions on the subject than Eleanor, and is very apt to sharing those opinions very passionately, she still has this concern and consideration for her sister. And even though they haven't come to a point of agreement, Marianne did not want to push it too far, her Eleanor's feelings, and so she gave pause to the subject. And that passage continues, but the kind of approbation which Eleanor described as exciting in him by the drawings of other people was very far from that rapturous delight which, in her opinion, Marianne's, could alone be called taste. Yet, though smiling within herself at the mistake, she honored her sister for that blind partiality to Edward which produced it. So, still doesn't agree, but she's like, okay, Eleanor likes Edward. I'm just going to give her the benefit of the doubt here. She's not right, maybe, but I can understand why she feels this way. They continue, and Marianne kind of shares that view. Do not be offended, Eleanor, if my praise of him is not in everything equal to your sense of his merits. I think him everything that is worthy and amiable. So she likes him, but I mean, is he the perfect guy? Marianne's vision of a perfect guy? No, but Eleanor is also not the same as Marianne. Marianne was rejoiced, continues, to find that her sister was so easily pleased. So I love that we sort of get a window into Marianne's thought process, especially in this first section, where you kind of get a little bit of a view into her kind of sisterly actions, and how even though she and her sister are very wildly different, they have different views, especially on this subject, they're still able to have this conversation, even if they're kind of like jesting a bit in their disagreement. Later on, Marianne says, I shall very soon think him handsome, Eleanor, speaking of Edward, if I do not now. When you tell me to love him as a brother, I shall no more see imperfection in his face than I now do in his heart. Eleanor started at this declaration and was sorry for the warmth she had been betrayed into, speaking of him. She felt that Edward stood very high in her opinion. She believed the regard to be mutual, but she required greater certainty of it to make Marianne's conviction of his attachment agreeable to her. She knew what Marianne and her mother conjectured one moment. They believed the next, that with them, to wish was to hope, and to hope was to expect. She tried to explain the real state of the case to her sister. So another moment where Eleanor has been speaking warmly of Edward just because of the conversation they've been having, but yet Marianne's like, yeah, when you tell me you're engaged and are going to be married to him, I'll love him like a brother. And that is not what what Eleanor has had in mind. Eleanor continues, I do not attempt to deny, said she, that I think very highly of him, that I greatly esteem him, that I like him. Marianne here burst forth with indignation. Esteem him, like him, cold-hearted Eleanor. Oh, worse than cold-hearted. Ashamed of being otherwise. Use those words again and I will leave the room this moment. Eleanor could not help laughing. I think that's a really lovely portrait of sort of that sisterly banter that sometimes occurs between sisters, especially when they're of different temperaments. The conversation keeps going. Eleanor had given a real opinion to her sister. She could not consider her partiality for Edward in so prosperous a state as Marianne had believed it. Just keep going on. Whatever might be its limits, it was enough when perceived by sister to make her uneasy. And this kind of at the end of the chapter kind of switches to the kind of sisterly connection between Mrs. John Dashwood, and kind of picking up on this connection between Eleanor and Edward that she views in pretty much the same way as Marianne. So Marianne is not alone in her kind of view of, well, they're going to get married, obviously. So it kind of shows the difference in the mindset too between Marianne and Eleanor. But I just love that, especially the little outburst by Marianne when she's like, oh, cold-hearted Eleanor, like him, esteem him. But that was the part in the first volume of Sense Sensibility that I thought really Austen did a fantastic job of kind of focusing in on the sisters and kind of this conversation between the two, kind of embodying sisterhood. Next, we'll move on to volume 2 with Medea.
Yeah, thanks, Maisie. I had a specific moment in volume 2 that I wanted to talk about as demonstrating sisterhood. And this is in volume 2, chapter 7, which is right after Marianne has run into Willoughby, and he's been less than kind, and we get this kind of reveal of the letters, or the letter that he sends her, and his return of the letters that she had sent him. And it's this kind of dramatic, emotional chapter. But the moment that I really want to focus on is when Eleanor is in the room with Marianne, and I'll go ahead and read the passage. Eleanor had not spirits to say more, and eager at all events to know what Willoughby had written, hurried away to their room, where, on opening the door, she saw Marianne stretched on the bed, almost choked by grief, one letter in her hand, and 2 or 3 others lying by her. Eleanor drew near, but without saying a word, and seating herself on the bed, took her hand, kissed her affectionately several times, and then gave way to a burst of tears, which at first was scarcely less violent than Marianne's. And this is a moment in the novel that I really, really love, just because throughout it we see Eleanor so very composed, so very composed, so very calm in her emotions, and not kind of exhibiting that in any dramatic way. And we see, of course, Marianne being the total opposite throughout the course of the novel. But I like this moment a lot because of this kind of outburst of emotion from Eleanor, which is still, it's a little bit short-lived. She kind of calms down a bit and then is talking to Marianne about the situation. But I like this this outburst of emotion because it's out of concern and empathy and like passion on her sister's behalf, which to me is one of the most important aspects of sisterhood, at least for me in my life. I have 3 sisters. I'll talk about them a bit later, but I'm very well accustomed to the feeling of getting passionate and indignant on a sibling's behalf. So this moment really stands out for me as one that shows Eleanor doing that. She kind of drops a bit of her composure and has this emotional outburst that rivals Marianne's. And I just like that she does that for her involuntarily. I think it really demonstrates the bond, the connection that they have. And I think throughout this chapter as well, Eleanor she's very protective of Marianne and Marianne's emotions and Marianne's situation. Because this is kind of embarrassing. I mean, Marianne has been talking to this guy, and then it turns out this guy has been talking to someone else. And been lying to her and like cheating her this whole time. So obvious, it's like very sensitive moment for Marianne to be going through. And I really like this chapter, this section, because Eleanor is so protective of her. I think at other points in the novel, we see her kind of telling Marianne, like, hey, you need to keep your emotions in check and kind of regulate yourself. And not being bossy, but kind of telling her, like, hey, you should have a bit more control over your sensibilities. But in this sort of moment, she's letting Marianne feel, she's permitting her to feel. She's not sort of reprimanding her in any way. She's feeling alongside her. And she's even kind of, in my opinion, acting as a bit of like a bodyguard, an emotional bodyguard for Marianne, because they have civil duties and kind of custom things to attend to. There's people they're supposed to be hanging out with and social events they're supposed to be participating in. But Eleanor, who usually is kind of like, okay, we have to do this social thing. Let's go do this social thing. Let's be nice. Let's be polite. Let's show our manners, all that kind of thing. She kind of drops that a bit to protect Marianne. And there's another moment in this chapter which precedes the one that I just mentioned, but it's when Mrs. Jennings is talking to Eleanor and she's like, blah blah blah, da 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 da, Marianne and Willoughby's engagement, and haven't you heard? And this is she's gossiping, which I think usually Eleanor's very against, anyways. But I like this moment a lot too because she very explicitly like shuts her down. She says, "Indeed, ma'am, you are mistaken. Indeed, you are doing a very unkind thing in spreading the report, and you will find that you have, though you will not believe me now." And I like this because she's like, you believe that they're engaged because you've been like hearing hearsay. This is crazy. You need to not talk about this, because she knows obviously more than Mrs. Jennings does. So while she's not she's not giving the details, she's not exposing anything that happened, because it's not really hers to tell. So she's keeping those specific details to herself, but she's still sort of acting as this protector for Marianne. She's saying, hey, don't spread that gossip. Don't talk about this. And so I feel like this is very emblematic of sisterhood, these kind of moments where Eleanor, despite having warned Marianne about the situation, she could very much instead be saying, I told you so a million times over right now. But instead, she takes the time and energy and emotion to protect Marianne and feel alongside her. And I like what that says about sisterhood, and I like how it figures in the novel. Yeah, so that's a moment from volume 2 that really stood out to me. And now Sarah is going to take us into volume 3 of the novel.
Yes, thank you, Nadea. I love the image of Eleanor as Marianne's emotional bodyguard. I love the mental picture of Emma Thompson just like putting up her dukes and literally entering into some hand-to-hand combat with Willoughby and Mrs. Jennings and all of the other people who sort of just try to knock Marianne down a peg, for lack of a better word, throughout the novel. I love that. I really, really think that there are a lot of moments in Volume 3 that also really, really do a good job of expounding upon this theme of sisterhood that we have seen develop continually throughout the novel through Eleanor and Marianne's relationship. But I've chosen to focus on the climax, the crux of the plot, where we see Marianne getting very, very sick, and it's a huge problem. She gets sick and then she gets a little bit better, but then it gets so much worse. And Eleanor and Mrs. Dashwood and Colonel Brandon are all really afraid there's a true possibility that Marianne might pass away. She might not make it out of her heartbreak, which has turned into a putrid fever, alive. So chapters 7, 8, 9 are where I really want to focus our attention for volume 3. So in chapter 7, we get this really, really sweet note, a sweet passage about Eleanor that says, she continued by the side of her sister while Marianne was sick, with little intermission the whole afternoon, calming every fear, satisfying every inquiry of her enfeebled spirits, supplying every succor, and watching almost every look and every breath. So again, we see Eleanor established really as Marianne's protector here. She is a few years older, and so I think it's very common of she's got that eldest sibling mentality of like, I've got to protect my younger siblings. I have got to I've got to be the one who's there, who's got to play mother if, mom's not there. And of course, at first, Mrs. Dashwood isn't there. So a lot of the burden of responsibility is falling on Eleanor's shoulders. And I think that it's really, really sweet how carefully and attentively she is treating her sister at this point in time, just really reassuring her, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I'm going to take care of you, and you don't need to be scared. I know this is a scary situation, but I'm going to be here for you no matter what. I'm never going to leave your side. I think that is so sweet, and I really, really think as much as Eleanor and Marianne kind of go toe to toe and bicker throughout the novel about, well, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be less open about your feelings and you need to feel more. And sometimes they really are at each other's throats a little bit, like any good sibling duo. But at the end of the day, they do care for each other so deeply. And I think you can see that so clearly when Marianne gets sick and Eleanor she's like, I'm not going to leave your side. You are my whole heart. I think that is so sweet and so wonderful. But then, of course, as Eleanor is nursing Marianne in the midst of physical illness, she's also nursing her through her emotional heartbreak, from the fallout of everything Willoughby. And so right after this chapter 7, where Eleanor is thinking, oh, Marianne's never going to get better. I've got to stay here. I've got to be here for her. I've got to take care of her. Willoughby shows up drunk at their house, like a crazy, crazy ex, as he is. And he, as we kind of already went over, I'm not going to rehash everything that he says because we did a deep dive in our episode on suitors and romance in the novel, which was really fun. You should go watch that episode if you haven't. But he gives this long-winded explanation of, yes, I treated your sister wrong, and here's why I did what I did, and I'm so sorry, and I still love her and esteem her, and it's gonna be terrible. But like, please, 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 won't you tell her how sorry I am? Just please, please ask her to forgive me. And Eleanor says, looking, she already forgave you. You still suck though. Like, you're the worst. Um, but then finally, at sort of the end of the conversation, he's being a little more serious. He says, will you repeat to your sister when she is recovered what I have been telling you? Let me be a little lightened too, in her opinion as well as in yours. You tell me that she has forgiven me already. Let me be able to fancy that a better knowledge of my heart and of my present feelings will draw from her a more spontaneous, more natural, more gentle, less dignified forgiveness. Tell her of my misery and my penitence. Tell her that my heart was never inconstant to her, and if you will, that at this moment she is dearer to me than ever. He says, please, please, please tell her I messed up. I love her. He really is drunk dialing this girl. He's so wasted. And Eleanor is just rolling her eyes, but she says, I will tell her all that is necessary to what may comparatively be called your justification. And you really, really, throughout this whole scene, get the sense that Eleanor does not have a high opinion of him. She's like, he's crazy. He's being silly. This is not appropriate. This is so inappropriate. This is not fair to my sister. This is not fair to his wife. But I love the fact that she sticks it out in this very uncomfortable, awkward, inappropriate situation with him banging on their door at night and demanding to speak to her. She sticks it out and she stays because she knows Marianne would want her to. She knows Marianne would want to hear his explanation, and she thinks that Marianne deserves an explanation. And she says, I will tell her what you have told me. I won't tell her, I'm not going to tell her that you kind of don't like your wife and you wish that you had married her and like everything has been terrible, because that's just going to make her worse and give her false hope. But I will, for your sake and for hers, tell her that I will give her your justification. I can't tell you that I'm going to say, oh, you need to forgive him and, just don't think badly of him. I'm not going to tell her that. But I will impart to her what you have told me. And I think, it's really great just getting that sense of, yes, Eleanor is so uncomfortable throughout this whole conversation, but she sticks it out for Marianne's sake because she wants to be able to tell Marianne, look, you weren't delusional this whole time. He did really like you, and he told me that, and he is sorry. And then there at the very, very end of that chapter, end of that scene, Willoughby says, well, once more goodbye. I shall now go away and live in dread of one event. And Eleanor says, what do you mean? And Willoughby says, your sister's marriage. And Eleanor tells him, you are very wrong. She can never be more lost to you than she is now. And that is such a good line because, again, we've seen Eleanor sticking it out in this awful, dreadful, inappropriate conversation where she is so uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, she does say, no, you lost your shot. My sister deserves better than you, and she will never be coming back to you. And I love that. I love Eleanor's conviction, and I love that she does really truly feel sorry for Willoughby, which she says several times throughout the scene and even later. But she says, no, she can never be more lost to you than she is now. She is never coming back to you, no matter how much you apologize. Marianne is better than you. She's stronger than you, and she's going to get over it, and she's going to be fine. So really, really just sticking up for her sister. I love that. But then, of course, she has to go back to Marianne and actually tell her what has happened. And she's really kind of chewing her lip, biding her time, trying to think of how can I say this in a way that is not going to make Marianne's heart hurt even more than it already does. How can I say this in a way that is not going to mess her up emotionally forever? How can I say this in the least traumatic way? So finally, they go on this walk, and Eleanor is just kind of, oh, like, how do I tell her? When should I tell her? When should I tell her? And finally, it says Eleanor managed the recital as she hoped with address, prepared her anxious listener with caution. So preparing her, saying, okay, look, we're going to have a serious conversation. Don't freak out. Just listen and give it a minute to sink in. Related simply and honestly the chief points on which Willoughby grounded his apology, did justice to his repentance, and softened only his protestations of present regard. Marianne said not a word. She trembled, her eyes were fixed on the ground, and her lips became whiter than even sickness had left them. 1,000 inquiries sprung up from her heart, but she dared not urge one. She caught every syllable with panting eagerness. Her hand, unknowingly to herself, closely pressed her sister's, and tears covered her cheeks. So we get this really, really sweet moment where Eleanor is doing just what she said she would. She is relating all of Willoughby's lamentations and insistences that he did truly love Marianne. She's relating it all. She's doing his explanation justice, it says. And she is really, really trying her best again to protect and take care of Marianne, spare her feelings. And I love in this moment because often Marianne throughout the novel has pushed away Eleanor's attempts to console her and really pushed away any of Eleanor's advice or sisterly, just any of Eleanor's attempts to really connect with her and give her advice, give her some guidance, give her some support. She's always like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're so unfeeling. Go away. You can never understand me. But I love when she takes Eleanor's hands and they're just holding hands and she's crying. She's really, really finally leaning on Eleanor for support, which I think is so beautiful and just such a sweet moment for the two sisters. And then right after it says, Eleanor, dreading her being tired, led her towards home until they reached the door of the cottage, easily conjecturing what her curiosity must be, though no question was suffered to speak it, talked of nothing but Willoughby and their conversation together, and was carefully minute in every particular of speech and look where minuteness could be safely indulged. As soon as they entered the house, Marianne, with a kiss of gratitude and these two words just articulate through her tears, "Tell Mama," withdrew from her sister and walked slowly upstairs. Eleanor would not attempt to disturb a solitude so reasonable as what she now sought. And so then she does go and tell their mother, which I think again really just reinforces the fact that finally this is the moment of Marianne's change of heart. This is where Marianne starts pulling away from her previous sensibility and leans a little more into Eleanor's sense, again letting Eleanor comfort her, giving her this kiss of gratitude on the cheek, and really exhibiting a lot of maturity when all she says is "tell Mama," and then she walks away and she goes to process and mourn in private. But she thinks her mother deserves an explanation just as well as she does, because her mother was so invested in their seeming engagement, the relationship that they appeared to have. I think it's only through this sisterly bond, through the interactions between sense from Eleanor and sensibility from Marianne, that Marianne is able to grow and develop as a character. And I do think that we see that so nicely through this joint sort of physical illness to recovery and mental illness to recovery. Not necessarily mental illness, although some have argued that Marianne does exhibit signs of mental illness, but just her period of emotional instability, her heartbreak, and carrying her over to the other side to feel whole and to feel okay again. That's really, really important. And I think that is a great moment in volume 3 where we see the sisters really come together and provide support for each other.
Following all of Sarah's lovely passages from volume 3, we're going to discuss a little bit of our own experiences with sisterhood as relates to our own siblings and friends. Personally, I have one sister. She's 5 years younger. And especially as Zendaya and Sarah were speaking, those certain passages that they chose really reminded me of the relationship between myself and my sister. I would definitely call myself an Eleanor, as we kind of decided in a previous episode, and my sister is most definitely, without a doubt, Marianne. Definitely dramatic and passionate and quite funny. But also, I feel like it sort of swaps too with the more like social gatherings. Yes, we may have some things that we need to go do, but I'm going to try and avoid those as best I can. And she's the one that's like, kind of, we got to go do this, but mostly because she's a social butterfly. So a little bit of a difference there. But I love that we can be so different, but yet, like, when it really counts, our differences don't even matter. So, like, I know that if either of us was ill, we just, like, the little things that we might dispute or jest about don't honestly matter, because we just love each other very much and want the best for each other, and we know each other really well. So yes, we're very different, and we kind of laugh about the dissimilarities between us, but at the end of the day, like, we're on the same brainwave. We're like, okay, I realize you need this. Great, we'll do this. Even if that might not be exactly what we personally want to do. yeah, I can definitely, especially watching Kate Winslet as Marianne, I'm like, oh yes, this is very much something my sister would do. But she has, I would argue, a great deal of sense as well, especially when I might be irrationally worrying about something or something like that. She can kind of turn on the pragmatic older sister mode when she needs to. But yeah, I feel like this novel in particular really reflects, honestly, the relationship between my sister and myself really well, which is pretty fun as I try to usher her into the world of Austen. She does love Pride and Prejudice. Sense and Sensibility is next.
Yes, girl, doing your God ordained sisterly duty.
Indeed.
Yeah.
What about you, Nadea?
Yeah, so I'm like you, Maisie, an oldest sister. I have 3 younger sisters, so quite the cohort. I have a sister who's 17. She just graduated high school last week. Um, and I have a sister who's 6, and then I have a sister who is 3 months old. So we have quite the range in my household. Um, but I definitely see a lot of Eleanor and Marianne and me and my 17-year-old sister. I think I'm usually more of the Marianne, and she's kind of the rational Eleanor voice in our duo, and it flip flops a little bit. But usually I'm kind of the dramatic one in my house. So I'll be the one that's like crazy, coming with all these like passionate ideas and things, and she's like, "Okay, so deep breath, relax, let's talk this out." Um, so we definitely have a bit of a flip-flop dynamic, but then also I think I like to think that I'm like a role model for her in the way that Eleanor becomes for Marianne. Once Marianne decides to alter her ways a little bit post near fatal heartbreak, I like to think that I kind of model that for my sister too, in a way. She graduated valedictorian, gonna brag on her a little bit. But she mentioned me as her best friend in her speech, and it made me cry. I was like, oh my gosh. But we definitely have like such a close like sisterly bond. Like I'm the only person she told that she was valedictorian because she wanted to surprise our parents. So I was like, oh, I'm special. I knew, blah blah blah. And I think also we've like been, well, obviously we've been sisters for quite some time. And we have spent like so much time together. And so there's also just that level of like knowing each other so well. Like if I'm lying, she can hear it in my voice. And if she's upset, she can just like walk through the room and I know like exactly what's wrong. So we definitely have that very deep like sister bond. And also in the way that we will banter and make fun of and tease each other really, really harshly. But like the second someone else kind of steps in and says something, then we're like tooth and nails, like, don't talk about my sister, blah, blah, blah. Um, but yeah, I love, and my little sisters too, the smaller ones. I'm close with them as well, but there's definitely understandably more of a bond between me and my 17-year-old sister because we're only 3.5 years apart. So yeah, I have quite the cohort of sisters. Sarah, what about you?
Oh, that is so sweet, Nadea. I, a little bit differently, I don't have siblings. I am an only child, which, of course, it's fine in its own way. I like being an only child. I would have liked to have had siblings, especially a sister when I was growing up, but it didn't quite work out that way for my family. And at the end of the day, being an only child definitely has its perks, such as the fact that I will, in fact, inherit everything whenever my parents die. There will be no fighting over the estate. Not that it's a very large estate, but, like, it's fine. I made my peace with it. But growing up, I was very, very lucky in that I had 2 really amazing god siblings. So I have a great set of godparents that I love to death. I actually work at a shop with my godmother every day, so like it's been so fun getting to know her as I'm an adult and we can get to know each other as adults and talk about some things that we wouldn't have been able to connect about when I was younger. But she also has 2 kids, and I'm 22, so her oldest is 23 and youngest is 20. So we were all kind of around that same age, which was really nice because growing up, we really truly were besties. We were all best friends. We spent almost every weekend at each other's houses in the summer, and just like when I met their younger child is adopted, so she came in a little bit later and was kind of a different addition. But um, their oldest child, my god sister, she and I met when I was 14 months old and she was 24 months old because our moms were best friends. They worked together as school teachers. And so we really did grow up being, as close to sisters as two people who were not biologically related can be. And that was really, really wonderful. I think as we were growing up, even though she is older, I wouldn't necessarily call myself completely an Eleanor, but I definitely was more of an Eleanor when it came to our relationship. And she was definitely more of a Mary Ann. She has always just been so whimsical and so fluttering like a butterfly, living her life. She has never been afraid to be exactly who she is. And I think it's great because she has encouraged me in a lot of situations to be more like who I am and not be afraid to be a little bit more open with people. But, on the flip side, sometimes she doesn't always think things through. She's not always very practical. She's a little bit scatterbrained. So I think like one of the defining moments of our friendship for me was, I think we were about 13, maybe 14. We went to Books A Million, and she was in line ahead of me buying her books, and she gave the guy, she did not give him enough money, and she like walked away and she's like, okay. And he was like, wait, come back. Like, you didn't, like, wait, like, that's not the money. And I was like, I'll just cover it. And I was like 13, but I was like, I paid the rest of the balance for her. And he was like, oh, like, you better be careful having friends like that. And I was like, don't you say a word against my sister. I will pay for her books anytime. I will never, ever, like, you will never get me to say anything bad about my sister. Do not say anything. And so I just, like, went to bat for her, and I was like, don't even talk to me. But so, like, I've always been, like, very protective, really felt like I needed to take care of her in a lot of situations, when she maybe just isn't thinking, which is wonderful and part of her charm. And, like, there was a time we were studying abroad, not together. She was in Ireland and I was in England, but we met up for a day and got to hang out abroad, which was so fun. And just crazy that we were at different schools and completely different programs, but we're able to have that experience abroad together. But she came to London and she got so lost, and we were going to go to a bar and have some drinks and have fun. And she got so lost, and I was waiting on her for like 30 minutes. And then like finally she had to just send me her location. I had to go get her and bring her back to the bar. And then the guy was giving her such a horrible hard time because she's about like 5 feet and looks like a child, which I also look like a child. I look like I'm about 16, so I get it. But the bouncer was giving her such a hard time, and he was like, yeah, I saw your friend waiting here for you. I thought you were a guy, and if you were a guy and you showed up this late for her, I was about to knock your lights out. And I was like, oh, thank you, bouncer. That's so nice of you. But then I was also like, hey, she got lost, okay? Like, don't give her a hard time. She's already crying because she was lost in the streets of London. So I do like have, I think, very, very protective instincts when it comes to her. But at the same time, we do balance each other out so nicely because she is always willing to try new things, and she has always, always, always stuck up for me. I used to get picked on a lot in middle school, especially, but also high school. And she really, truly had no problem ever confronting somebody who was being mean to me and saying, hey, don't you dare talk to her like that. That's mean. You're a jerk. I hope you go get flushed down the toilet. So like, like it's very much like we always have each other's backs. And even now we really don't talk as much as we used to. We live in different cities and we don't see each other very often. And I think both of us, we have people in our lives that we are closer to, in terms of like we talk to them more, we see them more, and we just have more in common with other people now. But I still know at the end of the day, she is my sister. She is my ride or die, and I will always, always, always be there for her if she needs me. And I know that she will always be there for me too, which is really nice. And I think I couldn't have been luckier to have found someone who is that much like a sister to me, who's not biologically related to me.
I love that, Sarah. And especially that studying abroad story. That is such a memory. You guys will never forget that.
Such a memory, for sure.
It's really sweet, though, that you guys have been sisters for so long. That's really nice. So with that, that's the end of this episode of our Sense and Sensibility vlog series. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode and for this much of the series so far. If you've been watching along, please join us next week for our final episode of the series, in which, not to spoil anything too much, but we will be taking a quiz to figure out which characters in the novel we might be. So definitely join us for that next week here on YouTube. Yeah, but other than that, we hope to see you in June at the JASP Symposium. But until next week or until June, I've been Nadea.
I've been Sarah.
And I've been Maisie.
And we'll see you next week. Bye!
Bye!